The episode of Kelly Clarkson's show was supposed to be lighthearted, fun-filled with laughter and music as Randy Rainbow joined her on stage to discuss his latest projects, but the atmosphere quickly shifted when playful banter turned into a tense exchange, with Randy bristling at one of Kelly's comments and the audience sensing an undercurrent of unease that grew sharper with every passing moment until what began as a cheerful appearance spiraled into a confrontation that caught everyone by surprise and left both host and guest visibly unsettled while the cameras rolled, capturing the tension in real time. As the conversation pressed forward, Kelly attempted to steer the moment back into the lighthearted tone that her show was known for, but Randy was no longer in the mood to simply smile and laugh along, instead leaning into a sharper and more pointed delivery that left the studio audience sitting on edge and whispering nervously to each other while the cameras captured every flicker of tension between the two, and Kelly visibly struggled to maintain her usual warmth and charm. Randy reminded her that he was not merely a novelty act to be teased, but an artist who had fought for recognition in a world that often dismissed him, and his words carried a sting that Kelly clearly felt, though she tried to brush it off with a nervous chuckle. Yet Randy pressed harder, questioning the sincerity of her compliments and suggesting that her approach felt more patronizing than supportive, which only deepened the awkward silence in the studio and gave the moment a weight that no one could ignore. And as Kelly straightened in her chair, her expression tightening slightly, the energy between them transformed from playful sparring into an undeniable clash of pride and ego that simmered dangerously close to boiling over. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter as Randy leaned closer, his tone dropping into something far more serious than the audience had expected, and his voice carried an edge that sliced through the air as he accused Kelly of downplaying the struggles that artists like him endured to earn a place in the spotlight. And while Kelly tried to interject with her trademark southern warmth, her smile appeared strained, her hands clasping tighter on the cue cards she held as if she needed something solid to ground her. Randy would not let up, pointing out that the entertainment industry thrived on packaging individuality into palatable forms for mainstream audiences, and he suggested that Kelly herself had become part of that machinery by inviting him onto the show not for who he truly was but for the caricature that producers thought would play best on daytime television. The audience gasped and murmured at the bluntness of his words, the tension rolling across the stage like a storm front, while Kelly finally dropped her smile and looked him squarely in the eye, a flicker of irritation flashing behind her otherwise calm demeanor before she retorted that she had built her platform on authenticity and kindness and would never willingly diminish anyone's artistry. Yet the friction between them had already grown so sharp that even her defense felt more like gasoline poured on a fire than water meant to cool it down. Randy shifted in his chair, his posture stiffening as if every nerve in his body had been set alight, and his hands began to gesture more sharply, his words tumbling out with unfiltered force as he declared that Kelly could speak of authenticity all she wanted, but it was easy to wear the badge of honesty when she already had a loyal audience, a hit show, and a catalog of records behind her. He insisted that someone like him had to fight tooth and nail just to be taken seriously, and accused her of only offering a stage when it was convenient for her brand. The audience audibly reacted to that accusation with gasps and a few nervous chuckles, though the tension in the room made it clear no one thought this was a playful spat. Kelly leaned forward now, her voice firmer, her jaw set, reminding Randy that she had started from the bottom herself and that every ounce of success she had was earned, not handed to her. But instead of calming him, her words made him bristle even more. His cheeks flushed, his breathing quickened as if he were carrying the weight of years of frustration and rejection, and he muttered that perhaps she had forgotten what it felt like to be dismissed, underestimated, and turned into a spectacle. And with those words a ripple of silence fell over the audience as everyone sensed that the situation was reaching a point of no return. Kelly's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, though her smile never fully disappeared. It was the smile of a host trying to keep the show from unraveling on live television, but her voice carried an unmistakable steel edge when she told Randy that no one had ever dismissed him on her stage, and that the only person turning himself into a spectacle in this moment was him. The crowd erupted in a mixture of nervous laughter and applause, sensing a sharp dagger in her words, and Randy visibly recoiled as though struck by an invisible blow. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the studio floor, his hands trembling as he gestured toward Kelly, accusing her of belittling him in front of millions. Kelly leaned back, keeping her composure, but her eyes flashed with the kind of fire that suggested she was unwilling to let him take control of her stage. Randy's voice cracked as he said he would not be mocked or turned into a punchline, his words echoing with raw vulnerability and sudden fury. The audience fell quiet as though holding its collective breath, and in that silence Randy made his choice, spinning on his heel and storming toward the edge of the set, his mic still catching the angry mutters spilling from his lips as the stunned studio gasped at the dramatic exit. The studio air felt heavy as the cameras tried to follow Randy's stormy exit with frantic cuts while Kelly remained rooted in her chair, her smile gone and replaced by a look of disbelief. The audience whispered among themselves, some craning their necks to catch a glimpse of him storming backstage while others clapped hesitantly as if unsure whether this was all an elaborate bit. Kelly took a deep breath, her voice quivering slightly as she addressed the crowd, reminding them that live television can be unpredictable and sometimes emotions run higher than expected. The crew scrambled just off stage, producers whispering frantically into headsets trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or ride out the moment. Kelly kept her composure, leaning into her natural warmth, but the tension was unmistakable. Her eyes betrayed the sting of what had just unfolded. She made a pointed remark about how conversations should build bridges, not burn them, a comment that drew applause from the audience and served as a quiet yet powerful rebuke to Randy's dramatic departure. Meanwhile, backstage, Randy paced furiously, tearing off his mic as staff tried to calm him down, his voice still audible through faint echoes caught by nearby equipment. And though the cameras were no longer on him, the entire atmosphere inside the studio was irrevocably changed. Backstage, Randy's frustration boiled over as he ripped through the narrow hallway, his words sharp and cutting, echoing against the studio walls. Crew members attempted to intercept him, asking him to breathe, to give him water, to let him vent, but he waved them off, his hands slicing the air with furious gestures. One assistant tried to reason with him, reminding him that millions were watching and the show would spin the narrative however they wanted, but Randy only grew louder, saying he was tired of being painted as the villain when all he ever wanted was to be taken seriously in his art and his commentary. A nearby producer whispered urgently into a headset, updating the control room on the chaos, while two security staff hovered in the corner, unsure whether to intervene or let him vent. Randy's face was flushed with rage but also streaked with frustration, a raw vulnerability that came out in his tone. Even as he lashed out, he muttered that Kelly had crossed a line, that she had invited him under false pretenses and then mocked his integrity, and that he would not stand for it anymore. The hallway buzzed with tension as the noise carried back toward the stage, where Kelly was still holding the show together with a smile masking the strain of what she knew was spiraling behind the curtain. Sensing the energy had cracked, she leaned into the microphone, her voice steady but her eyes betraying the tension behind them. She joked about how live television could always throw surprises, but the laugh that followed from the audience was nervous, not joyous. Producers waved from the wings, urging her to stretch the segment, but her mind was half with the crowd and half backstage where Randy had stormed off. She tried to keep her tone light, inviting the band to fill the air with a playful riff, yet even the music felt strained, as if it too was caught in the uncomfortable atmosphere. Kelly pressed forward, launching into the next topic, but her words tumbled too quickly, lacking the warmth her fans were used to. The weight of what had just happened hung thick over the room, and even as the cameras captured her polished poise, the studio audience whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that said they had witnessed something unscripted and unforgettable. It was the kind of break in television where everyone knew they were watching a moment that would ignite headlines before the day was done. The narrow hallway, sharp and defiant, insisting he would not be disrespected on national television. Crew members exchanged anxious glances while one assistant frantically relayed updates through a headset. Kelly, meanwhile, was still out front, clinging to professionalism even as she felt the weight of every second dragging. The studio audience leaned forward, whispering excitedly, some with phones discreetly raised, capturing fragments of the awkward aftermath. Those clips would soon blaze across social media, spreading the story before the episode even wrapped. Kelly's show had seen lighthearted hiccups before, but this was different. It was raw, unpolished, and entirely out of her control, and though she tried to bridge the gap with a heartfelt remark about live TV being unpredictable, the crowd knew this was not a staged stunt. This was a very real clash that had spilled far beyond the safety of scripted banter.